I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest now joining us from the newsroom of The Guardian is the reporter who's broken the Murdoch media scandal wide open. He is Nick Davies, award-winning investigative journalist at The Guardian in London. Nick Davies, welcome to Democracy Now! Well, did you ever think that though you've been covering this for quite some time, that your report on the hacking of the murder victim, Millie Dowler's voicemail by the News of the World would shake the Murdoch empire to the extent that it has?
No, so I've been working on this thing for 3 years, very slowly parceling out the truth. I mean, I think I've done 75 stories on it. But the Millie Dowler story was fantastically powerful. I mean, I knew when I filed it that it was the most powerful story we had done so far. But I never foresaw this extraordinary chain reaction of emotion, which just pummeled the entire Murdoch camp. And really very rapidly, within 3 days, it reached a point where nobody could be seen to be Murdoch's ally anymore. And that's really, really extraordinary thing in this country, because for years, the opposite has been the case, that nobody could be seen to be Murdoch's enemy. It's kind of like having a bully in the school playground. And once the bully has beaten up a few people, everybody else in the playground recognizes that the bully is there. The bully doesn't even have to do anything particularly serious. All the other kids tiptoe around. And that means governments and police forces and other newspapers have all been tiptoeing around Murdoch, frightened to say anything against him. And this one story about this 13-year-old girl at the end of this long sequence of stories just broke through and changed the whole dynamic.
Well, Nick Davies, many of us here in the United States who watched the hearings this week were really surprised at the extent to which the members of Parliament really were dogged in their questioning and fairly confrontational in their questioning. Can you explain to us the degree of change that's occurred among these MPs versus how they treated the Murdoch empire in the past?
Okay, you look at it this way. For the last 2 or 3 years, while we've been trying to get this story out, there's been a maximum of 4 members of Parliament who were willing to stand up and talk about it. That's out of a total of about 630. Take as an example, there's a guy called Chris Bryant. He's been very good on this. Back in March 2003, he was a member of one of those parliamentary select committees, and he had in front of him as witnesses Rebecca Brooks, the then editor of The Sun, previously editor of the News of the World, and her close friend and fellow editor, Andy Coulson, who's the guy who goes to work for David Cameron. Now, way back there in March 2003, Chris Bryant asked a brave question. He said to Rebecca, "Have you ever paid the police for information?" And she, not considering the impact of her reply, said, "Yes, we have paid the police in the past." Now, this was dynamite. You're not supposed to admit to paying bribes to police officers. Okay, that was March. In December 2003, the Murdoch press exposed Chris Bryant. They accused him of what is in their ghastly moral framework a crime, which was that he was gay. And they published a photograph of him wearing a skimpy pair of underpants. They did that to humiliate that man, that politician, that elected politician, to punish him for daring to ask a difficult question and provoking a difficult answer. And that is a microcosm of why most of the rest of the 630 elected MPs stayed quiet, and why the police go quiet and the news organisations go quiet. The Murdoch organisation deals in power, and part of that power is about frightening people.
Nick Davies, on Monday, on the eve of the Murdochs testifying, Sean Hoare, a former reporter with News of the World who helped blow the whistle on the Murdoch-owned paper, was found dead in his home. Hoare had been the source for a New York Times story tying the phone hacking to former News of the World editor Andy Coulson, who'd later become the chief spokesperson for Prime Minister David Cameron. Coulson arrested as the scandal broke open. Hoare discussed his allegations against Coulson in an interview last September.
I have stood by Andy and been requested to tap phones, okay, or hack into them, and so on. He was well aware that the practice exists. To deny it is a lie. It's simply a lie.
That was Sean Hoare, found dead in his home. The police immediately said it was not suspicious. Nick Davies, you knew Sean Hoare. Can you talk about what happened? Do you believe it was suspicious, and what is his significance?
Well, first of all, there has always been a submerged network of former News of the World journalists who have assisted me and other people at The Guardian and the guys at the New York Times. Where Sean distinguished himself was that he was the first to come out on the record. And in doing that, he showed real bravery. He did this in the New York Times, not The Guardian. Real bravery because of the intimidation which the Murdoch organization uses. And specifically, if you're a journalist and you come out and speak out against this organization, you're losing any prospect of employment in the biggest media organization in the country. Sean did it. Okay. Now, I got to know him reasonably well. And he was he's a good guy. He had wonderful stories to tell. He dies this week. I'm afraid that unless somebody comes up with some evidence to contradict me, the sad fact is that Sean, who was many years younger than me, died because his body was ruined by alcohol and cocaine and ketamine. And in the background, the reason why he consumed quite so much alcohol and cocaine and ketamine and all the rest of it is because there was a long period of time when Murdoch's newspapers paid him to do that. So the way he put it to me was, I was paid to go out and do drugs with rock stars. And he was a show business correspondent, so he went out with a lot of very famous rock stars, and he ingested massive quantities of alcohol and drugs. And Sean was a great guy. He had enormous bounce to him, so he made no bones about it. He had, enormous fun doing it. He enjoyed doing it. But looking back, he could see that it had ruined his body. He had become very, very ill. His liver was in a terrible state. He said to me, my liver's so bad, the doctors tell me I must be dead already. It's a kind of black joke. And so I am afraid that his body caught up on him and he died. And it's very tempting for outsiders to say, well, that can't be a fluke. That can't be a coincidence. But unless somebody comes up with something I haven't heard of, it was just a coincidence.
And the significance...
If you were going to kill him, you'd have killed him a year ago, before he started talking.
And the significance of what he was saying, pointing the finger at Andy Coulson?
Yes, when he went on the record with the New York Times, it was very important. He was the first journalist to come on the record and say, Andy Coulson definitely knew about this at first hand. I promise you that that's the case. And he kept on saying it, like the interview with you. He was really good, because it was easy then for the Conservative Party, which was employing Andy Coulson, to deploy their members of Parliament to go out and smear Sean. They said, oh, well, he took drugs, you can't believe him. You'll spot there's absolutely no logic in that. That's just a smear. So they gave him a good old smearing. And then the police, Scotland Yard, who were still in the phase when they were absolutely not interested in seeing the truth, they went round and interviewed him. But as soon as they got into the room, instead of saying, OK, you're an important witness, they said, you're a suspect, and anything you say could be used against you. So Sean used foul language and invited them to go. But he was good. He stood by his guns. I really liked him. You know, it's easy to look at an organisation like the News of the World and see its ruthless invasion of privacy, its lust for destroying people's lives in order to make money, and assume that everybody within it is as bad as the organisation. But in fact, there are lots of individuals in there who worked there, smelt the smell, and walked out and left it. And there are lots of good people who've helped us along the way.
We're talking to Guardian reporter Nick Davies, who broke this Murdoch media scandal wide open. By the way, that interview of Sean Hoare was done by the BBC. Juan?
Nick Davies, I'd like to ask you about two other things that were kind of overshadowed in the hearings with the Murdochs and with Rebecca Brooks. One was the testimony of Sir Paul Stevenson, the now resigned head of Scotland Yard, and the other was a press statement that was put out by the law firm that the Murdochs had supposedly had hired and which held many of the documents that are now raising many major questions. First of all, about Sir Paul Stevenson. One of the shocking things in his testimony was that 10 out of the 45 employees of the press office of Scotland Yard were former employees of News of the World. And could you talk about this incestuous relationship between Scotland Yard and the News Corporation properties in England?
Okay, so if you see that in context, the reality of life in this country for some decades has been you can't run a government and you can't run a police force unless you are on close friendly terms with the Murdoch organisation. So there are all sorts of connections between the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, that's the biggest police force in the country, and News International, which owned Murdoch's newspapers in this country. And So the fact that ex-journalists were being employed by their press office is part of that picture. But there's a whole set of connections. And to me, what's so revealing about this story is the sequence is this, you see. You have News of the World journalists going out there breaking the law routinely. And they're allowed to get away with it. But then they make a terrible mistake. They hack into the voicemail of the one group of people who are more prestigious or powerful than the Murdochs. That's the royal family. They get caught hacking Prince William's phone. So finally, the police have to come in and do something like their job. But at that point, when the police had the option of gathering evidence to show how much crime was being committed by Murdoch's people, they chose not to. They did a little job on the royal family as victims. They sent the royal correspondent of the paper to prison. They sent the investigator to prison. And the rest of all the evidence that they collected during that inquiry, they didn't properly investigate because they didn't want to get into a fight with that powerful organisation. And that, you see the seriousness of that they were exempted from normal law enforcement just because they're so powerful. Really, really wrong.
And the issue of the law firm, because the same day that the Murdochs testified, the law firm put out a statement that they would like to be released from their lawyer-client privilege to be able to set the record straight about things that were being said about them. And the importance of this law firm and the records that they kept, supposedly not even letting the Murdochs know what was in it.
And now apparently the gag has been lifted.
Okay, so just to understand the narrative, the chronology, back in 2007, there's a trial. The royal correspondent and the inspector go to prison. Those two guys come out, and the royal correspondent in particular says, "You sacked me, and I want some compensation." And he then says, "Look, I know everything that was going on in your newspaper, and if you don't give me decent compensation, I'm going to blow the whistle on you." So News International then take this collection of emails and send it to a firm of lawyers. The firm of lawyers look at them and then write a letter which says, "There's no evidence in these emails that anybody knew that the royal correspondent was breaking the law." And you'll see that's a very, very narrow statement of denial. What has now emerged is that those same emails included all sorts of evidence of criminal activity, including the bribing of police officers. So when the Murdochs, James and Rupert, gave their evidence to the Select Committee, they said, well, we didn't know that was in there. This law firm should have told us that there was evidence of crime in all these emails. Don't blame us, blame the law firm. The law firm is saying, we want permission, which I think they've now got, to publish the instructions which we were given by Murdoch's organisation. Now, I don't know what those instructions are, but the implication is that they were told to look through the emails and report only on the very narrow question, do these emails contain evidence that the royal correspondent was instructed to hack royal voicemail? And because they weren't asked whether also there was an orgy of other criminal activity revealed, they didn't. So they're going to throw the ball back at the Murdochs, you see. We're in that cover-up phase. Who was responsible?